Welcome, Poke fans, to Week 3 of the GBA Season 10. My name's Gym Leader Geo.
And my name is Aster.
We've got an exciting Week 3 lineup coming this week, so let's just jump right into it. Here's what's going on around the league this week. We've got the 0-2 San Francisco Arcaniners traveling down to SoCal to take on the 1-1 San Diego Snugglers. The Calgary Flamethrowers, fresh off their first win of the season, looking to keep the momentum alive as they host the Edmonton Coilers, who are also claiming their big first win in Week 2. The 1-1 Playmore Esports traveled to Borussia to take on the 1-1 Donphans. The Copenhagen Sawsbucks are taking a long flight over to Chicago to battle the Dragapults. Let's hope they stretch out those legs after that long flight. Jay and the 1-1 Atlanta Victinis on the road looking to bounce back after a tough loss last week. They'll be taking on the 2-0 Wolverhampton Weaviles at home. Last but not least, UzigunNer and the undefeated Bullet Punch Club travel to the Big Apple to take on GoldoaDragon and the New York Empoleon. It's the city that never sleeps, so you can rest assured that Uzi won't be sleeping on this tough opponent either. Arcaniners Snugglers battle of the California Kings in this week's derby matchup, looking like a very dangerous matchup this week for both teams. Really got to tread lightly here, guys. San Francisco is really going to need to look out for that hazard stacking. San Diego has a lot of options for stealth rocks, spikes, T-spikes, and they're very effective against George. His 3 highest draft tier picks are all rock weaknesses: Volcarona, Chi-Yu, and Gyarados. I expect either some heavy duty boot utilization or some hyper offense where he doesn't need to swap as much, or we can expect to see Hawlucha, Rotom, or Volcarona in attendance packing Defog, but it's going to be really important to kind of monitor that hazard stacking situation. Regieleki could bring Rapid Spin, but I don't see it, and let me tell you why, because it's our second thing to watch out for this week. San Diego has an electric problem. His top tier mons are both outsped and massively threatened by San Francisco's Regieleki. They have no electric resists, only Toedscruel as the one immunity, and I'll be honest, that's gonna bait in Hawlucha. And anytime your only defensive answer to a threat baits in another massive threat, you're giving too much offensive opportunity to your opponent. I don't like the Snugglers matchup against Regieleki. He's gonna really need those hazards up ASAP to try and force a lot of chip and try and take this guy down. I'm also going to be watching closely for how these two teams play at that speed tier game. Of course, San Francisco has the upper hand here with Regieleki and Hawlucha, but mostly I'm looking at that 100 speed tier. How do these two teams play this one? We've got Chi-Yu and Volcarona, both threatened by Palafin, but all 3 of those mons are base speed 100. So really curious to see how this is going to play out, how either of them try and take advantage or remove some weakness battling in that 100 speed tier.
Great observation, Geo. Those base 100s and everything around there are absolutely a factor, especially if that Volcarona tears into a water type. Now, moving on, we have the 0-2 Sawsbucks facing off against Q and the Dragapults, who are coming off a big win at home for 4 points last week against the Borussia Donphan, led by their assistant coach, FranCTrode. Looking at the teams, the first thing that becomes apparent to me is that Frosted does have the upper hand here in terms of Terra options, as that Terra Poison Hydreigon looks to be much more effective than the Terra Iron Moth trying to solo a Talonflame, a Landorus, potentially even an Assault-Vested Slowbro. Secondly, the combination of Diancie and Magnezone could make it very difficult for Q to remove hazards that would greatly hinder his team's ability to swap into Copenhagen's threats like Iron Bundle and Hisuian Zoroark. However, look out for something like the Iron Hands to be a massive nuisance that cannot be switched around, as it has coverage for every mon on the opposing side, and without anything to OHKO it, the Sawsbucks are going to need to outplay attacking turns correctly with Intimidate shuffling, immunity to few key typings with that Zoroark, all while avoiding disastrous turns like we saw last week into the Hisuian Samurott. Ultimately, Frosted just needs to stop beating herself in these games, and she has acknowledged that already. So my advice would be to take a few extra seconds to decide on 2 to 3 turn courses of action whenever possible. As for the Pults, they just need to keep playing well. They've been playing well both weeks, and as the strength of their draft will carry them through most of these games if played correctly, which they have been doing so.
Playmore Esports at Borussia Donphan this week. Two absolutely excellent players going at this matchup, both 1-1. I'm telling you folks, be on the lookout for these guys capitalizing on weaknesses to pick up unexpected kills. What I'm going to be watching for this week is predictions. These two players are extremely capable of it, and both of these teams actually really similar on paper in that they both have lots of glaring weaknesses to several types, but also tons of immunities, and both teams have really good coverage options. If these potent threats pack coverage, it's going to require a lot of predictions on both sides to try and determine what moves we click to break those walls or pick up those unexpected KOs. I really like Sandaconda this week. I think Hazards will do great against the Donphans. I think he checks Iron Treads beautifully and keeps Salamence and Enamorous quiet with Glare. So I predict he'll be coming and he'll be making a splash. I'm also going to be watching for how the Donphans build their defensive roster this week, and I think that's going to be key in this matchup. Cresselia and Iron Threads, dominant defensive options, but Ben does seem to have answers. So Lars, he's an excellent team builder, and I'm sure he's going to have to make some really strong decisions to ensure that those walls have an impact. I also think it's going to be a battle of draft value this week. I'm seeing a lot of Playmore Esports' S tiers kind of getting shut down by Donphan's S tiers. But on the other hand, Playmore's lower tiers have real value against those S tier threats on the Donphan's team. Roaring Moon might not even come if it fears Enamorous or Moonblast Cresselia, but Iron Treads is answered by a lower tier Anaconda. And Enamorous and Pawmot are both need to be careful of Kilowattrel. So I'm going to be really watching for that this week. Does Playmore really get some strong value out of their lower tier mons and bring that to shut down and lower the value of some of Donphan's powerhouses? Otherwise, I think Donphan has it on paper without Playmore being able to capitalize on some of those lower tier threats.
For sure, Geo. Even the Mismagius has very few answers for it, as the Weavile can't pursue it, of course, to stop it, and nothing else really wants to swap into that Shadow Ball, so we'll have to keep a lookout for possible Choice Specs or even Choice Scarf from Playmore. Our next matchup is going to be where my bias shows a little bit. If you've kept up with me, you know that the Coilers have quickly won my heart this season, and they'll be looking to repeat last week's performance against D.Rey's Snugglers. However, that won't be as easy as Galeodite showed us last week just what they're capable of and what some of these monstrous threats like Ursaluna and Terra Quaquaval are capable of if under-prepped for. Ursaluna in particular is going to be a massive obstacle in Dell's way as it obtains free switch-ins on mons such as Galarian Slowking, the Tyranitar, the Donphan, and even the Thundurus if Grass Knot can be avoided. What I'd like to see from Dell here is a very offensive mindset and possible combination of Iron Valiant and Tyranitar to exploit Calgary's need to bring Slowking and or Salazzle just to swap into Specs Moonblast at least once. We saw last week how the Florges was able to pick up an easy KO with that Psychic on turn 1 into the Salazzle, so I'd like to see something similar here with the Valiant. It's likely Baxcalibur will be looking for free turns as well, as Ice plus Ground plus Freeze Dry is basically a one-way ticket for win for the Flamethrowers, so that's another thing to watch out for. I think that Dell and Owen are going to have to come up with some pretty unconventional ways of dealing with the opposing offense coming their way so that they can get their offense going early enough. That being said, we could see some rather strange sets this week. We'll have to wait and see.
Week 3 matchup of the 1-1 Victini and the 2-0 Weaviles. Let's talk Ice Weakness, okay? Jay's got it. It's on his top Pokemon. Tornadus, Sandyshock, Zarude, hell, even Dragalge. And Weaviles have Frostmoth. I'm not gonna lie, I think it could really do some work this week if it gets behind a Quiver Dance. Doesn't stop there, though. If Victinis have an ice problem, Weaviles have a flying problem. And against a team with Tornadus, Therian, I don't think it's one that the Weaviles are going to take lightly. I think Rotom Heat is an absolute must in this matchup. It has to come. It has to try and shut down or reduce the impact of that Tornadus. I wouldn't be surprised if Bisharp comes too. Both of those Mons, though, they can get worn down by Tornadus Pivot, and they don't really have reliable recovery options. I also, if I'm being honest, I don't love Weavile's answers to Urshifu. Samurott can't go toe-to-toe with it. Iron Leaves has to fear that U-turn, and even Walking Wake can't survive a Trailblaze into a close combat unless it's really defensively invested. And if Tornadus is going to be baiting in that Rotom and Bisharp, guess who handles those two Mons perfectly? Yep, it's Urshifu. I'm loving that duo for Jay this week, and I think it's something that we should all be on the lookout for going into this Week 3 matchup.
I'm a big fan of Urshifu with its buffs this generation. Even just drafted it myself a couple of days ago. And you're right, Gio. It causes immense pressure into Wolverhampton's roster. So we'll see how they can actually deal with it. And now for our final matchup this week, GBA fans, we do have a surprise for you all, as Buff Boy MattyBrollic will be playing in Uzi's stead for Week 3. Yes, that's right. This is Matty's first ever GBA game. Now, Uzi has been on a tear thus far, bringing incredibly good prep and playing lights out. And now we get to see one of the greatest to ever do it step in to give Uzi a break. And the Bullet Punch Club are taking on Goldoa's New York Empoleon this week. Now, despite all that hype just now, Matty is going to have to be very careful about not losing momentum, specifically with that Clodsire. It's his only switch into Goldoa's Zapdos, but it invites in Mew and Garchomp, which can both be very obnoxious to deal with, as they're afforded the ability to both be either offensive or defensive this week. So it's quite annoying to have to pick out which of the two is the offensive threat, which is the defensive. The other issue is that Ceruledge, it can Terra Ghost or Fairy with Bulk Up and Taunt, and that can quickly get out of control, and Matty needs to have some kind of precautionary measure in place for it, because his priority that would normally hit super effectively loses that once Ceruledge changes typing, except for maybe like Sucker Punch from Lycanroc if it chooses to Terra into a Ghost type. That's the only way that he can really hit it. But Goldoa's not out of the woods himself, though. That Dragonite has shown that it knows what it should be every week. Credit to the coaching pair for teaching it well. But a timely setup plus Encore Dragonite, for example, could be making an appearance in this game, as Goldoa gets a lot of his offensive game from being able to set up himself, so getting Encored into set moves could be very detrimental for him. Ultimately, I think Matty just needs to bring his big brain and draft league boots to this match, and he can walk away with a convincing win this week. We'll see if his experience can carry him through, though, what looks to be a tougher matchup this time around.
From all of us here at the GBA, we hope you're looking forward to these Week 3 matchups. Be sure to check out all these fantastic coaches. Links in the description down below. On behalf of myself and the entire GBA staff, thank you so much for tuning in, everybody, and we'll see you next time.